Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, CTO here at Gardner Systems. On 26th of April, we're going to be running a cybersecurity readiness event here in Liverpool. So do look out in your email boxes and on our social media channels for invites and information about the event and how you can join us. But what we want to do ahead of that was give you an idea of the topics that we're going to be covering so you can make sure this is an event you can get the most value from. So to help me to do that, I'm joined today by our keynote speaker for the event. It's Jon Hope from Sophos. Hi John, how are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for having me, Paul.
No, real pleasure, and thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us here in Liverpool today. So, before we jump into the topic, why not give us a little bit of a background on who you are, what it is you do at Sophos?
Sure thing, absolutely. Yeah, so my name's Jon Hope. I'm Senior Technology Evangelist at Sophos. So it's my role really to research the threat landscape, understand what's going on, understand what the challenges are, and then look at technology and services and processes that our customers can adopt in order to keep themselves ahead of the cyber criminals and basically keep themselves secure.
That's great. So in these first two videos, actually, we're going to kind of break that down into two areas. In this first part, we're going to talk about that threat landscape. And in the second part, which you'll also be able to find on our social media channels, in that second part, we'll talk a little bit about some of the modern tools and approaches that people can use to deal with that. So why don't we start there then? So what does the modern threat landscape look like? You know, what are you seeing as the big risks that you're seeing, part of your role at Sophos, but also in the conversations you have with customers and businesses of all types, I guess?
Absolutely. Okay, so it probably doesn't come as a surprise that ransomware is the topic that dominates most of my time. Ransomware is a phenomenon that's been around for a very long time, but it's really started to become a challenge in more recent times, particularly because of the rise of a phenomenon known as ransomware as a service. So we're all used to consuming things as a service these days, and cyber criminals actually operate a very similar business model. So if you want to be a cyber criminal, then you don't necessarily have to be an expert in end-to-end creation, deployment, and harvesting the money off the back end of ransomware. You can actually break those steps down and go to organized cyber criminal gangs that will offer some or all of those services. So for example, if you want to be a cyber criminal and you don't know how to infiltrate an organization, you would go to what's called an initial access broker, and they would actually get into an organization for you and then sell you the access that they've created. Or if you're not necessarily skilled upon how to create ransomware, you can go to a well-known ransomware author and actually buy their software, buy their code. Or if you're not sure how to work with cryptocurrency and how to get the money off a potential victim, then again, you can outsource that element as well. In all cases, you're giving the gangs a proportion of your earnings, if you will, in order to access their skills and techniques. And this has caused two really big challenges. The first is that you've effectively made it much easier to get into the ransomware game. So we're seeing a lot more attacks associated with ransomware because you can go out there and buy these toolkits really, really easily. It's also simultaneously had the impact of driving ransomware to the masses effectively, and it's become a problem for organizations of all different ilks and all different sizes. Traditionally, cyber criminals would have only really targeted a large organization. If you think about it from a business perspective, which is absolutely how the cyber criminals operate, they would look at return on investment and say, well, if I'm going to put all this time and effort into creating ransomware and launching it, I need to go after the big targets so I can get my money back effectively. So the return on investment argument would always gravitate towards bigger organizations. But now it's a lot easier to launch ransomware, it's a lot more scalable. All of a sudden, targets that maybe traditionally wouldn't have been viable targets, like let's say education and local government, for example, organizations that maybe don't have a huge amount of money to pay ransoms, they're potentially becoming victims. And then similarly for organization sizes, smaller businesses that maybe again don't have a huge ability to pay traditionally would have been somewhat safe. But now, because it's easy to launch ransomware, it's scalable, then those organizations potentially become victims as well. So we've seen a real shift in the way that organizations are being targeted.
Just to jump in there, I mean, it's fascinating to me that kind of the way you're describing that is that these cyber criminal organisations are running pretty much as businesses themselves. It sounds like, again, they've got their own HR departments. They're sending out job adverts almost saying, if you've got cyber hacking skills or would like to learn, come join us.
Absolutely.
And it also sounds like the cost of delivering those services, because they've dropped so much, of course, and making it so much cheaper for them to build to build a potential threat. So they're targeting much broader sector of organisations and of business types. Are you Do you see any cases now? So certainly one of the comments I would hear, probably, if I wind back 5 years, would be, well, who'd be interested in my business because we're only small or we're only X, Y, or Z? Yeah, do you see today any types of organisations where the cyber threat's not a reality and something that they've got to be able to deal with, or do all organisations, almost regardless of size and sector, have to do at least something to start to deal with this?
Absolutely. Okay. So organisations of all sizes and all different types should be really aware of the ransomware problem. No sector is safe. There is a lot of research into which organisations are still more popular, and there is a more likelihood in certain sectors than others. But the reality is, because of all the changes that I've just talked about, plus another interesting thing that has happened in the world of ransomware, without going into too much detail on the political climate, we're also seeing cyber criminals and cyber hacktivists launching ransomware all of a sudden without necessarily a financial motive, but maybe hacking and attacking for political purposes. So the threat landscape has really changed, and it just means that all bets are off, and potentially any organisation could be a victim. So everybody should be aware of ransomware, and everybody should be thinking about how their organisation can stay secure and stay safe from the threat.
So we talked a lot about ransomware there. So in terms of other threats, are there other things that organisations should be aware of, or is there evolutions in the way that maybe ransomware is getting delivered, or just kind of brand new threats? Is there other things organisations should be looking out for as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So in terms of how the ransomware is delivered, that's probably the area that changes and evolves the most, because there's always a human element involved in ransomware. So the cyber criminals will be constantly changing and adjusting their techniques in order to get individuals to click on links and effectively fall for the phishing bait. So whatever's topical right now is whatever the cyber criminals will be going after. A few years ago we'd have looked at coronavirus as a key thing that would have got people's interest and they would have clicked on the links. Now probably the conflict in Ukraine and lots of other topics that are relevant and pertinent. So training individuals inside the organisation to recognise what's likely to be phishing and ideally not click on it in the first place is super important. And that social engineering vector is always something which is constantly changing, constantly evolving. The other thing we also probably need to keep an eye out for is data exfiltration. There are lots of software capabilities, including our own Intercept X, which is actually fortuitously really good at blocking ransomware. And the cyber criminals know this, so they're starting to shift techniques a little bit as well, and they're going for what are called double extortion attacks. So if you're going to be a victim, then what I would do as a cyber criminal is simultaneously encrypt all of your data, and then also steal your data and hold on to it as well. The reason you would do that as a cyber criminal is if you're in a position where you've got a really good backup, and an organisation should have a really good backup, then why would you pay the cyber criminals, right? So it's disruptive for sure, but I've got my data backed up, I'll just restore it and I'll get back up and running. The criminals know this, so in order to maximise the payout, they will then attack the organisation and say, well, look, if you don't pay the ransom, sure, you might have a backup, but I'll just make all that data public, or I'll sell it to your competition, or just post it online and ruin your reputation that way. So, having a backup is an important part of the strategy, but it's never going to be a silver bullet because of these what are called double extortion attacks, where data could be stolen and exfiltrated.
Yeah, and I think this opens up a broader threat as well in terms of things like targeting backups as well. So while it's important that organisations have backups, cyber criminals have recognised that and are starting to deal with that. So, yeah, we're going to talk in our second video a little bit about kind of tools and techniques, and obviously in more detail at the event. But to give the folk who've spent some time to watch this video and listen to us chat here, maybe as a little bit of a free takeaway for them, is there any kind of tips that you would give an organisation to say these are things that absolutely, a top 2 or 3 things that an organisation should be doing to help prepare and protect themselves from the evolving cyber threats?
Sure, absolutely. So we'll talk about the more advanced techniques in the second session, but as a minimum, make sure you've got endpoint protection, that it's up to date, that it's a good caliber endpoint protection. Obviously cover your servers, cover the network from a firewall perspective. Do the basics there. Do the basics from either password management or, better still, multi-factor authentication to make sure that your users can't be compromised and the cyber criminals can't use their credentials to move around the estate. And then user training. So I touched on it, a lot of attacks will have some kind of social engineering element. So having your users super smart to recognize what might be phishing and maybe not instinctively clicking on the links, but maybe taking a moment to check, reporting it to IT if they're not sure, that will get you a long way against these kind of attacks. If everybody just did the simple stuff, then fortuitously most attacks would just get blocked in the first place.
Well, John, look, this has been fantastic, really good insight. And very much look forward to hearing in much more detail about the evolving threat and a little bit of what we're going to be covering in our second video as well, looking at tools and techniques you can use. But we're going to be doing that in a lot more detail on the 26th of April. So for now, John, really appreciate your time. And if you want to find out more about what John's been talking about, either around the modern cyber threat and the tools and techniques that you can use to address them, then do join us on the 26th of April. But for now, John, thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the 26th of April.